Hey guys, today we're going to be building one of these hidden compartment shelves. Pretty simple. Just use the magnetic latch, open up, it's hanging on the wall. Put the magnet inside of anything. It's a relatively simple build, so let's get started. So we're just going to start out with some 3/4 inch maple plywood. Really like the way the stain looks on the grain of this wood. Also has a very thick veneer. Takes a little more effort to sand through, so it's pretty sturdy and durable. We're just going to cut that down to about 7.5 inches by 18.5 inches. Sometime this week I'm going to get to building a miter saw station. I got a new miter saw and it does not fit on the old stand without a whole bunch of modifications, so we're just going to build a new one. We're going to cut a 45 on our piece of crown molding. You're going to put that crown molding upside down on the fence when you cut it at the 45. It's going to give us the proper angles when we attach that to that bottom piece of the shelf itself. And then we marked, and we're going to cut our other side. Now here, this makes it a little bit easier. I have a rubber matting that I put in the bottom of the shelf. I just glue it on with some 3M glue, but I like to cut it ahead of time to the exact size of the bottom of the shelf. Would have helped if I would have broke the tip off of that knife and got a fresh blade on there. Now we attach all of our pieces with glue, and we're just going to use some 18 gauge 1.5 inch trim nails. Just have a little pneumatic nailer there, works really awesome, had it for a bunch of years. I like to throw a little clamp down on the bottom, kind of helps hold the piece in place as I'm working on the trim. Elevates it off of the workbench, makes it a little easier to get in there and get those nails through it. Make sure that your nail gun, if you do have one and you're using it, is well centered. You don't want to end up with a nail coming out of either side of your shelf through that veneer. And for our side, I've already cut a 45 on this piece, so we're just going to mark on the back here in a second. That's going to give us our length right there. Go ahead and cut that, and that'll fit and rise and perfect. I've built a lot of these, so I'm pretty confident in my measurements, haven't had any issues. You can always cut those sides just a little bit long and just kind of sneak up on the fit on the miter saw. Make sure that you don't take off too much. You want that to fit flush with the back of that bottom shelf. Always glue up the corner joints as well, It's all part of the structure of our bottom shelf, holds things in. Same thing, those 1.5 inch 18 gauge nails, we're just going to shoot a few in there. Attach that side right there. You can build these just about any size that you want. Your limiting factor is going to be what type of crown molding you use, the measurements on it. These are just some smaller ones that I build that are easy to put up on the wall and come back and cut our other side here. We're going to cut our 45 the other way. Measure that, get a good mark on it, and cut that to fit flush back there. Got this miter saw the other day. It's the Cobalt 12-inch sliding miter saw. I have to say I've been pretty impressed with it. It had to do a pretty good amount of adjustment out of the box, but honestly once I got it adjusted, I have been cutting with it daily and haven't had anything come out of adjustment since then. Been pretty dang happy with it, honestly. And for the price, it's kind of hard to beat. Again, a little glue on that corner joint there. And there's the old air compressor that's going to get replaced soon. That locks up occasionally. Need to build a little closet for the new one. Keep that sound down. I like to shoot a nail right there in the top corner as well. Kind of helps hold everything together while the glue's drying. And right here we're just going to flush up our trim with that piece of plywood. I like to leave it just a hair sticking out when I put it on. That way I can sand that trim down to fit flush and not wear through the veneer on the plywood. Right there, I was just checking to find my square corner on that scrap piece of plywood. And now I'm going to mark for my top piece that is going to be the actual shelf stuff sets on. Now you're going to want to account for, when you cut this, the gap that you're going to need in order for the shelf to open and close properly, because it will be hinged on the back. You can have some variation with the crown molding depending on the size, the batch that it came out of. That's why I don't really have a set measurement on the top. I just go around and mark it and cut it. Makes for a little more well-fitting top. And now this is just some 1 1/4 inch trim that we're going to attach to 3 sides of the top shelf. And that is also going to cover up some of our crown molding down there to make it look seamless when you're looking at it from the side. Cut our 45s on there, and again, when we put this together, we'll glue those corner joints up to make sure that everything is nice and snug and tight and stays there. You can also vary the style of the top trim or your crown molding, just depending on which one you get, and kind of change up the look of these shelves pretty easy. They're a pretty simple build as long as you have something that'll cut nice 45s on those corners. The rest of it is a piece of cake. And the same thing as we did on the bottom, we marked our side. We'll go ahead and trim that, check that that's the right length, and absolutely perfect right there. Sometimes you have really good days with the measurements and you just go with it and be happy and make some more cuts. And again, I'll throw that clamp down there just to hold that up, makes it a little bit easier. Glue that front edge on, and then we will match the two sides to that front edge. A nice layer of glue on there. And we'll attach this trim as well with those 1.5" 18 gauge trim nails. Make sure your corners are lined up properly on both sides, otherwise your sides aren't going to match up well. As you're going across and nailing that in, make sure that your trim is flush or just a hair above the plywood, because again, you'll go over it and sand it and make it nice and smooth. You don't want the plywood sticking up above your trim anywhere, because you'll have to sand down through the veneer to get it to be flush, and we're going to be staining this, so we don't want any of that veneer missing when we go to apply the stain. If there's any other videos you would like to see, or different ways you would like to see the videos done, go ahead and throw that down in the comments. Always looking for any kind of advice or feedback on these videos. Put on this last side here. Nice thick coat of glue. We want some good strong joints. We don't want any of this coming back apart over time. Also, if anybody out there happens to have a battery powered trim nailer, looking to buy one of those, if you have any feedback or preferences on brand or specific models, something that works really well for you, throw that down in the comments so I can check those out. And right here I forgot to drill the holes for the European mount hinges, so I'm going to come back and do it now. Not really a big deal because it's pretty close to the same location I would typically drill the holes anyway. If you don't have one of those jigs, get one. They're really cheap and they are super handy. Make it so much easier to line that up. You just slide it right up against that edge, and there's different detents depending on the offset of your hinges. Now we're going to put our top on, and we're going to have bracing on the inside. There's going to be a piece that goes across the back, attaches to the wall, and there will be two pieces coming out at a 90 from that back piece. We're going to measure the inside gap between the inside layers of our plywood, because it can vary depending again on your batch of crown molding, because it can be different thicknesses just out of a different batch. Lots of variation I've noticed on different shelves that I've done, that I've bought the crown molding at different times throughout the year. This particular one came out to right around 2 1/8 inches, I do believe. I leave an 1/8 gap at the bottom because that rubber mat that I glue down in the bottom is about 1/8 of an inch thick. And then I measure, once we get this cut to size, we're going to measure from the front of that back brace to the front of our plywood shelf to get our size on the sides. Now right here, if you put your hinges in and you take that back brace and you pull it up against the flat edge of your hinges, it will square them up and help hold them in place while you are putting the screws in. I always like to take the punch and go with the one I have fits right inside of the holes on most of these hinges. It makes it a little bit easier to get the screw started, keep it centered right where you want it to be, so you don't get off any. Make sure that we are lined up on each edge, don't need to trim anymore. Go ahead and mark our holes for our back side of our hinges. The next part of the process will be measuring and drilling holes for mounting, and also we're going to drill holes to attach the two side pieces to the front of this board. And I do drill the mounting holes on 16-inch centers. That's why I go with 18.5 inches on that shelf itself on the bottom, just because it gives you a little bit more room to install the mounting screws. We're going to countersink those and also countersink the screws that go into the side supports. And then we'll take our 16th inch bit and go ahead and pre-drill for the hinge screws that go on the back. It's always good to drill pilot holes, keeps things from cracking or splitting as you're putting screws in. Have to do a little bit of adjustment on these hinges to make them fit exactly the way I want to. There's plenty of adjustment on these to line up your back brace so that your shelf fits flush against the wall. It still opens properly. And now we'll cut our side pieces there that we just measured for. Also just got a new Delta table saw recently. It's the hybrid contractor saw. Much nicer, super smooth. I am going to have to build a new workbench because I use my workbench also as the outfeed table for my table saw. And it's just a little bit narrow for running full sheets of plywood across. So we're just going to take and pre-sand all of this, and that's enough watching that. I think everybody knows how to sand. And this is what our bracing is going to look like. That's going to attach to those hinges. Our top will also attach to this set of bracing. We will be putting glue on these joints and also screwing it in through the back in those holes that we pre-drilled. I'm just running some 2-inch screws into these. That holds them plenty well, and once the glue dries, it's plenty strong to hold up stuff on the wall. I like to throw a clamp on there just to kind of hold it in place, because I do drill a pilot hole into those side pieces, because again, we don't want to split out those pieces and have to repair or cut another piece and be wasteful. I just pre-drill a pilot hole with an 1/8 inch bit that I have before I put my 2-inch screws in there. You really only need the clamp on there for putting one of the screws in, is the way I do it. The other one is pretty easy to line up. Get that good and tight. One thing that you're going to want to do for sure is, and I forgot to do it, I usually do it in my pre-sanding, I had to go back by hand and do it, is sand the inside of all of that trim and the outside of the trim. The inside, if you do it beforehand, you can actually do it with your orbital sander because it's flat. I mean, the outside you obviously have to sand by hand because there's lots of curves and different shapes on there. So, but that pre-sanding really helps, especially when you do the inside and you don't have to come back and do it later. So all right. And now we need to reattach or officially attach our brace on the back to the hinges, because that's going to help us with our placement for putting the top on. Our top as well will be held on with glue along that top edge, and then we will run some of those trim nails down through there to hold it in place until the glue dries. Get everything nice and lined up here. Make sure it all fits, and then we will put our rubber matting down there to hold that up so that it'll actually press tight against the top, and then get some glue on there. Just remember, we left a little bit of gap for that matting, so we need to be able to fill that gap so that our top presses tightly against that. We need a good tight joint to get that glue to dry. Before you run those nails in, just kind of check and make sure your gap around all of your edges is pretty even. And we will run some nails across the back support piece that mounts to the wall. And then if you'll take your square and line up, you'll be able to see where to put your nails in to attach to those boards. Makes it a little bit easier. And right there we have an opening and closing shelf. So right now what I'm pointing at there was the thickness of the trim. I use chains, a chain on each side to limit the opening of the bottom of the shelf, And the trim that I'm using, there's a real thick spot right in the middle kind of the trim. I have specific measurements for mine of where I drill pilot holes to attach those chains. All of this is really just preference on how you want to do it, how far you want it to open, and what type of devices you want to use to limit the opening. Now, somewhere I didn't turn on the camera, there's a 3-inch block up there that part of our latch is going to mount to, and all that is a 3/4 by 3/4 piece of scrap wood that we cut at an angle to fit the angle of the current crown molding that we have on there. And then it is glued and some nails are run through it to hold it in place. A lot of the placement on your latch is going to depend on what kind of latches you use. I use the magnetic latches. You can get them on Amazon. They're actually for keeping cabinets closed. I think they're in the child safety section. Go ahead and reattach our top, get all our screws in, get our hinges adjusted. We want everything to be exactly where we want it to be before we start trying to put our latch in. So the latch that I'm using, the catch, will mount on that little board that was attached to the front. Now the way that I've been doing these latches, I had some latches before that were kind of rounded, and I had built a little jig that fit up against that front piece of trim and made it to where the latch was in the same place every time I put one of these together. But I just measured from the front of the crown molding back to where it was going to catch properly, and then if you measure your gap right there on the front, which mine's about 3/16, and then you take that measurement you got initially, add that 3/16 to it, and come back, and you should be pretty close. Just center it up with the catch. Now these have adhesive backing on them, which really helps with your initial setting up to make sure everything fits before you have to put a bunch of screw holes in. I got pretty lucky. It fit the first time, latched properly. So we'll just throw those screws in and call that a win. Now these do open and close a lot easier once you have something inside of them. A little bit difficult to open initially when the hinges are real tight. So you're going to want to take some wood filler, fill in any gaps, any nail holes you have anywhere. Run the sander over that and get that all nice and flush, and then go over your trim by hand. Again, we're staining this, so we want to have a nice clean open surface for that stain to take properly. Lots of hand sanding. I wish I could actually sand that fast in real life. And right here is where you completely overlook one of the nail holes and have to break out the wood filler again and fill that in and wait for that to dry. But we got that done. We are going to put a color on here that is called Kona. It's by Varathane. One of my favorite colors. I really enjoy this color. It's a dark, rich color. I really didn't need to go out in the middle of the bottom there, but I got a little carried away starting out. That's going to be all covered up by that matting that is going to be glued down to the bottom. And you don't have to worry when you're putting the stain on around that latch right there. The latches are plastic and the stain wipes right off, no problem. I just prefer to get everything mounted in place before I put the stain on in case we have to make any changes or adjustments. And we'll do the same thing to the top. Put some of that stain on there and wipe it back off. It is looking very nice so far. I am really particular about staining things, so I like to make sure that the back also has stain on it. I don't want anything left bare. Now on these shelves right here, I just use some spray polyurethane. It's a little bit easier than brushing it on, get a little bit better finish, in my opinion. I would like to have a paint sprayer set up, but I'll have to upgrade my air compressor first. Would much rather spray polyurethane than try to brush it on, but man, it looks so good the way it pops once you get it on that stain. And then we're just gonna let that set overnight and get a little bit of sleep. Oh, first we got to go back over. Always go over and admire your work. Kind of look at it and just enjoy the fact that you've just created something, and man, it looks good. Make sure there's no bubbles or dust in there, and then we'll go get some sleep and come back here the next morning. So I also forgot to show that, but basically I take and mark around the hinges. I pop the hinges down there in the holes and cut out these squares in that black mat. Now this is just 3M 77 glue. One of the things with this glue, you want to spray it on both surfaces in order for it to get a proper bond. Kind of let it tack up on both surfaces, and once you put it together, it will be there. It's pretty warm in the garage that day, so it was tacking up rather fast. Just make sure that you get it lined up with your front edge and your sides. Kind of smooth that down, and we'll come back and wipe that off later once we get the shelf all put together. Make sure there's no dust on it. Just a nice little touch, adding that in there makes it look so good. And now we will begin our final assembly. As far as the magnet goes for opening and closing the actual shelf, most of the time I will build a little box and go to Harbor Freight. They have the rectangular magnets, and I will put the rectangular magnet in kind of a little wooden holder and stain it the color of the shelf, just as one to send with it. A lot of people put them in different places. You can put them in the bottom of cups or anything up there. As long as the magnet is accessible to activate that lock, you are good to go. Another thing with most of these latches, if you'll notice when you put the magnet on it, you'll have to kind of just nudge up the bottom a little bit, just a little bit of lift, and you'll hear the actual mechanism release on the lock. You can take that weight off of it, and then it'll open right on up. And our next process, I always attach the chain to the top first because you can't really get a screwdriver in there afterwards. And then I will take a short screwdriver, some short screws, and attach the bottom piece of the chain. This normally isn't that difficult. For some reason, trying to catch all this on camera is a lot harder sometimes than I imagine it to be, but we got there, and there we have a beautiful shelf. Voila. Well guys, that was our build on the hidden compartment shelf. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the like button. I'd appreciate it. It really helps. You can check us out on Instagram at Story Woodworking. Also on Facebook, Story Woodworking LLC. If you have any questions about anything on here or anything you'd like to see in future videos, go ahead and throw that down in the comments and I'll take a look at it. Hope you learn how to build one of these today, and you can go out and make yourself one. They're pretty simple. We'll be having some more projects coming up. Hopefully here in the next week I'll get some video on those, and I hope all y'all have a good day.